So here is my drug interview. Um, this is about my friend. I'm going to call him John for this presentation. John was cocaine. He also used alcohol throughout college um, and before college. We grew up together in Germany. I've known him for 8 or 9 years at this point. Alcohol was legal, so we had a lot earlier of a integration with alcohol use. So the reasonings that he gave that he began using cocaine was the rushes of energy that it gave him. He had a lot of liveliness. He said that there was something that it kind of changed the way he looked at the world and how he saw things, and it was too hard for him to explain, but that was one of the reasonings he gave. And then he felt like with each thing that he did, there were no consequences to whatever it was. So he didn't really think of any consequences. He didn't really have any sort of semblance of what might happen afterwards. So the drug interactions and the other drugs that he did use, he rarely took multiple drugs in combination. He didn't take any opioids, hallucinogens, anything like that. He said maybe once or twice, but it wasn't really a normal occurrence. If there was a mix, it was alcohols at parties, at home, at any other location that he was able to mix the two. Some of the mix reactions that he would say, he said it felt amazing. He said it was like a burst of energy, but just crazy amounts. He said that the crashes afterwards were terrible. He would wake up and just feel like crap. Um, there were multiple times in which he said it was just like his whole next day was gone between just kind of the crash between the two and how it made him feel afterwards. But he said that the feeling while you're on it just totally makes up for it. The spiritual factor. So he turned away from religion when he was in college. He was very religious before college. He was always going to church. He was always doing Bible studies. He would make sure to integrate those into things that he did in his life. Anybody that knew him in high school knew that he was very religious and that he would make sure to live his life like that. He moved away from religion and it lost the meaning to him when he went into college, when he started using. There were multiple other things that influenced this choice of his as well. And then after all of those bad incidences in college, and the 4 years later, he had not graduated because of some of the substance abuse, misuse things that occurred in his life. He moved back towards church. He's going to church now. But there was that period in his life where he just stopped going. So he does have some spiritual integration that he did not previously have when he was more abusing the drugs. So what were some behaviors that I saw, or that he saw in himself that he thought he needed some extra help? He woke up in a ditch. This isn't just one time. This is one instance that I am speaking of. But there were multiple times in which he would just wake up someplace random. He'd just kind of not know where he was. He would have his phone on him. Sometimes he wouldn't, and he'd have to kind of wander around, piece together where he's at, and then call from a local food place, from something like that, let somebody use their phone. He lost a lot of friends and close people in his life at that time. Some of the behaviors that he exhibited were just, he really was not a great friend. It was very difficult to try and stand by him at these times. There was even a period in college where I kind of stopped talking to him, just due to the kind of craziness that was going on. He was all over the place mentally, and just kind of not being a great friend at all. He strained his family relationships, and it even strained his lack of funding for college. They did not pay for some of his schooling due to the drug use. when they found out, they were very mad, and it severely strained the family relationship. It's doing much better than it was, and it's doing pretty good now. But at the time, it was a huge issue. He did at one point steal from his roommates. He got caught. He paid them back. Um, Instead of getting any police intervention or anything like that, he wanted to avoid that at all cost. He actually got hospitalized once for this. And then he sends me a message, and he's doing cocaine at the hospital as well. So that was not really sure. That was just probably one of the big points. That's one of the biggest things that he did mention, is that he was like, yeah, I went to the hospital for cocaine, and then I ended up using cocaine at the hospital. So that was one of the big instances in which he said he needed some help. So how does therapy help for him? One of the things that he mentioned, he went to an outpatient counselor. He never went into any sort of residential treatment or any PHP, IOP type programs. He went to an outpatient therapist once a week for a little while through the school. And he slowly started separating it a little bit more, so once every 2 weeks, twice a month, and then once a month, not once a month after that. So it was a view of how he was harming himself, in an integration of just kind of some psychological knowledge, how it affects his brain, how it kind of affected himself. Harming himself, not physical harm to himself, but just how it was harming his relationships, how it was harming his social interactions, how it was harming his grades in school as well. Changing his behaviors that were harmful. That was one thing that the therapist, he said, worked very heavily with him. And this wasn't just behaviors with the drug misuse. This was also the alcohol integration with it. This was also some of the more toxic things that became normalized in his life, is what he had said, that he was doing with friends, trying to build relationships back, changing some of the negative self-doubts, bad self-esteem, depression symptoms that he exhibited. And that one of the other things is that he gained some more awareness. He had made a lot of negative influence friends at the time that he was misusing. The therapist kind of eventually, and he started to see this as well, is the negative impact that those people had on him, and how they impacted the habit that he had gained. So that was 3 of the big things that he said were very helpful from therapy, and how talking to the therapist and how they were able to help kind of change how his life was. And I asked him how it has impacted his current life, and what is the impacts of that. So he's still dealing with some family and friend issues there. His family relationship is much better than it was. But there are still some strains. There's a small amount of mistrust. Friend issues. He has lost friends that he knows he will never speak to again because of this. He also has been slowly trying to build back relationships and whatnot to try to make things right. And trust issues with everyone that was affected. There's people that he knows he's going to either have to build back or won't trust him ever again. His family is another one that he's had to slowly build back trust to try and get them to trust him. And he said that they may not even fully trust him ever again. One of the other ones is that he's still finishing out school. He said that he failed at least 7 classes at the time he was going to school. He's been doing some work back. There's been some stuff that he's had to do to kind of make that up, outside of just the school. But changing his grades, making sure that they didn't fall. He almost fell below the level at which there would have been some academic removal from the school because of how bad his grades were getting. But he's been able to turn that around. He's trying to finish out his bachelor's degree now. One of the other big ones was the labels. He had been labeled as an addict, as a misuser, as pretty much anything regarding that. Somebody not to trust, somebody not to be around. his self-esteem and was very bad, big depression symptoms as well. His awareness issues culminating from the use, however, have drastically increased, and he's on a great path now. And then some treatment methods, some understanding. So cocaine misuse and abuse can be assisted with mental health services. This can be both residential and outpatient. This is from the United States Health Service, as well as pharmacological, which he did not get too much assistance through, but it is a very effective treatment. It may even be the best. Integration of spiritual bodies can be a great factor to lean on and benefit from. Many of these use the 12-step model, which incorporates spirituality in the treatment. He did not incorporate any sort of 12-step model. He did eventually go back to church, incorporating spirituality in himself, but it was not from a particular 12-step model. It might have been pushed by the therapist to continue to go to church, but there wasn't a 12-step model in essence in the treatment that he used. And then some of the addiction processes can be rooted in emotions. The human brain can integrate these emotions and allow for them to be felt every time something may occur. And here is my works cited.